Welcome to Raising Awe Seekers, how the science of wonder can help our kids thrive. I'm your host, Deborah Farmer Kris. Last week, I talked to you about the 139-year history of the phrase audacity of hope. Today, I'm going to stick with the topic, but this time I'm tracing the origin of my professional writing mantra, which is tell the story of hope. So I'm going to start with a story, because several summers ago, there was a day when my daughter was playing at the beach and she left her favorite pair of shoes near the shoreline, and high tide carried them away. She was upset. And so to help her work through her sadness, we began to imagine a new life for the shoes, as a shell for a hermit crab, as an unexpected catch for a lobsterman. We imagined one day, years from now, walking along the shore and finding her tie-dyed Crocs and laughing that they had finally come home. 2 days later, we found the shoes. They were washed up on the beach and covered in seaweed. Her younger brother and I cheered, but she just shrugged. A few minutes later, she whispered to me, "I'm kind of sad we found them. I liked the stories more than the shoes." I usually like stories more than shoes, too. In his book, Shaped by Stories, The Ethical Power of Narratives, author Marshall Gregory wrote, "For human beings, the pull of stories is primal. What oxygen is to the body, stories are to our emotions and imagination." Now, I am not a fiction writer. I mostly write about parenting and child development, a whole lot about awe and wonder, but all the same, I keep this phrase on a yellow sticky note beside my desk, and I have had it there for close to a decade, and it says this: tell the story of hope. It was several years after adopting this phrase as my professional mantra that I suddenly had this memory of why these words, this idea was lodged in me. So let me back up, because as a kid, I was a really voracious reader, and one of my favorite authors was Katherine Paterson. I particularly loved the book Jacob I Have Loved. Bridge to Terabithia is devastatingly awesome, and I read it and cried multiple times. There was Great Gilly Hopkins. So, her books were part of my emotional education. When I was in college, I was studying both English and education, and I came across this book of essays by Katherine Paterson, and it's called A Sense of Wonder on Reading and Writing for Children. This book is now out of print, but I had transcribed this passage in my college notebooks, which are still in my office closet 20 plus years later. So I dug them out, and this is a passage that I had taken the time to handwrite in my college notebook. And this is what she said at a Newbery Medal ceremony. Katherine Paterson: "People ask me why I write for children. I don't write for children, I say. I write for myself. But it's not true that I simply write for myself. I do write for children, for my own four children, and for others who are faced with the question of whether they dare to become an adult, responsible for their own lives and the lives of others. They remind me of the biblical children of Israel trembling on the bank of the River Jordan. You might remember that Moses sent spies ahead who came back to tell of the richness of the land. But 10 of the spies advised the Israelites to turn back. The cities are fortified, they said. The people are giants. It would be better to return to slavery in Egypt or to wander aimlessly in the desert." She continues, "I want to become a spy like Joshua and Caleb. I have crossed the river and tangled with a few giants, but I want to go back and say to those who are hesitating, don't be afraid to cross over. The promised land is worth possessing, and we are not alone. I want to be a spy for hope." Isn't that a great phrase, spy for hope? Somebody asked me recently about kind of my core philosophy as a parent, which is really hard because I don't have just one. I don't think there's any blueprint for raising kids. I know that there isn't. And anybody who says there is trying to sell you something or has a very limited sample size. But I do think that one of the best gifts we can give our kids is perspective, because we've all lived longer than our kids have. So we've seen the cycles of the weather, of politics, of the ups and downs of life. And we have also seen them from the time they were little infants and the ways they have grown and the challenges they've overcome. And so when they are in the midst of a middle school crisis that they think will never end and that they will never feel better about this friend who's betrayed them or this thing that has happened, as we comfort and listen, we can offer a kind of perspective that can fuel hope. The perspective of how far they've come, of where they might go, reminders that no feeling lasts forever, that no challenge is unending, and that while we cannot guarantee how or when things will change, they will change. Life is change. We can give some perspective on the long arc of history. We can give them perspective of the daily anecdotes of good people right in our own community doing good, small things in this messy world. We can tell stories from our childhood, stories from their childhood, family stories. I'm going to do a whole episode on the science behind sharing family stories and helping kids realize they're part of something larger than themselves, and that even if they didn't know their ancestors, that their spirit and their resilience can live in them. We can share stories of washed up shoes and stories of dried up tears. And I really believe that if we fill our kids with stories, we might just fill ourselves up too with that determined hope that we really need in the winters of our lives. So thanks for listening. And before I go, if you're enjoying this podcast, share it with a friend, consider subscribing to my Substack or pre-ordering my book. You'll find them both under the title Raising Awe Seekers. Till next week, I'm Deborah Farmer Kris. Thanks for joining me.